Hi, I'm Jack from Recomp Coach Jack here at ZAR Athletica in Newstead. In today's video, we're going to talk about the importance of hip mobility, how to screen for hip mobility, and then if you find a limitation in mobility, how to actually fix that ongoing and how to maintain it. So hip mobility is really important, mainly for getting down into a deep, comfortable and pain-free squat, which is going to be really important for most people's training ongoing. And if you're wondering if you've got a limitation in hip mobility, here's a great assessment drill to get started. So screening for hip mobility is really important. That basically means we want to check if there's actually a limitation in the hips. To do that, very simple. We're going to do what's called the Thomas test, or a version of the Thomas test. I've got client Cade here. He's just going to show us how to do that. You want to lay down on a bench exactly as he's doing with your feet out in front of you. We're going to reach forward and grasp one of the knees and try and pull it toward the chest with not necessarily a lot of effort, but just a little bit. We're going to give that a go just now. So we can see here when Cade pulls his knee in, he's actually got a little bit of tension at the hip here, not allowing that knee to come any closer to the chest. He's also experiencing a little bit of tension in his quads here, actually showing us he has a limitation in hip mobility. Now we're going to try and improve this through a few mobility drills now. So my first top tip for improving hip mobility is going to be a hip distraction drill. I've got client Cade here. He's actually going to show us how to do this. He's going to grab the resistance band. He's going to loop it through one of his legs, starting with the right, and then we're going to shift the entire body out away from the rack and get down into this lunging position. Now, ideally, you'd want to use a relatively thick resistance band. And here, the resistance band is actually pulling the head of the femur gently out of the hip socket, allowing for a little bit more range within external and internal rotation. So now Cade, all he's going to do is just push his knee inward and hold for a few seconds, and then push his knee outward. Meanwhile, while we're doing this drill, you want to make sure that you're planting the toes down very firmly so that we don't lose stability at the foot. You can push quite hard. It's not that uncomfortable because the hip is actually being pulled very gently out of its socket right up the top there. You want to do this half a dozen times back and forth for a couple of seconds each time. You can actually see that when Cade pushes his knee outward, he has very limited range on the external part, but a lot more on the internal. And that's going to be something we're going to work on. All right, top tip number 2 for improving hip mobility. We're going to actually work on the tissue stiffness around the lower body. I'd recommend everybody foam roll their legs for 1 minute to 2 minutes every day, or at the very least, every time they go to the gym, if they have the time. Cade is actually going to show us how to do that, starting with foam rolling the lateral hip. We're going to do this on the right leg, the same one that we were mobilizing before. You want to do this kind of slowly. Take 5 or 10 seconds to go from the top of the hip down toward the knee and not going too fast. Now Cade is going to, every single time he hits a tender spot somewhere on the leg, going to actually pause there for a couple of seconds and not move too quickly. We really want to try to improve tissue health and tissue stiffness, especially when it comes to improving mobility through the lower body. All right, make sure you do this for 1 minute to 2 minutes on both legs. We're going to do the lateral hip. We're also going to do the front of the quad and the hip adductor. We're not going to do it now, but absolutely get on the